Imagine this. You're standing before a mind that spares no illusions, no comforts, no lies. A thinker who dissected morality, shattered religion, and tore through every sacred ideal we cling to. Now imagine what happens when that same mind turns its gaze toward women. Friedrich Nietzsche, misunderstood, feared, admired, did not write about women with softness or sentiment. He wrote with fire, with cruelty, with brutal clarity. And what he saw wasn't what the world wanted to hear. To Nietzsche, the idea of woman was not just biological or social. It was psychological, symbolic, and profoundly existential. She was not the weaker sex, nor the fairer one. She was something far more dangerous, a force, a test, a mirror, sometimes even a weapon. He saw beneath the surface, beyond the masks society forces both men and women to wear, and what he uncovered wasn't flattering to either. His words have been called misogynistic, cold, even monstrous. But what if they were simply honest? What if Nietzsche wasn't condemning women, but exposing something deeper? The raw dynamics of power, seduction, and survival. The ways both sexes deceive each other and themselves. This isn't a tribute to chivalry. It's not a defense of tradition or an anthem of equality. It's something far more uncomfortable. A ruthless excavation of how Nietzsche believed men and women truly relate, stripped of illusions. And it raises a question few dare to ask. In a world obsessed with empowerment, has anyone really dared to understand what power means between the sexes? To find that answer, we must follow Nietzsche, not into hatred, but into truth. A truth that might offend, might disturb, but might also set you free. If you're ready to look into that mirror, to face what most people run from, then let's begin. Nietzsche's journey into the world of women didn't begin with hatred. It began with awe. Not the romantic kind, but the kind that borders on fear. He saw in woman something primal, ancient, untamed, a riddle, a threat, a seduction wrapped in mystery. She was not a moral ideal. She was not a nurturer in the Christian sense. She was nature herself, dangerous, beautiful, indifferent. To Nietzsche, woman symbolized chaos concealed behind elegance, instinct disguised as charm. And that terrified the modern man. Long before the popular cries for equality, Nietzsche recognized the power of woman, not as a social movement, but as an existential force. He didn't see her as oppressed, but as manipulative in her own right. Subtle, strategic, willing to yield only to dominate from below. It wasn't that woman lacked strength. It was that her strength operated in ways the world refused to acknowledge. Silent influence, emotional intelligence, the ability to bend without breaking. In Nietzsche's world, woman was not weak. She was willful. She didn't challenge man directly. She made him want to prove himself, made him dance for her approval. This wasn't flattery, it was warning. And thus spoke Zarathustra. He writes, "You are going to women? Do not forget the whip." A line often quoted, rarely understood. It wasn't an invitation to violence. It was a metaphor for preparedness, for the battle of wills that love truly is. Because to Nietzsche, love wasn't harmony. It was tension, struggle, power disguised as passion, and woman, in that dynamic, was never innocent. Nietzsche wasn't writing from bitterness. He was writing from exposure. He saw something raw in the feminine, a cunning wrapped in grace that society refused to name, and he named it. Not to diminish it, but to reveal its terrifying truth. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles. Nietzsche didn't just challenge morality, he dissected it. And in his dissection, he found a hidden hand shaping its structure, the feminine. Not the literal woman, but the archetype, the symbol. He believed that the moral codes preached by society, especially those rooted in Christianity, were deeply feminized, not because women had written them, but because they reflected traits Nietzsche associated with the feminine spirit: obedience, passivity, self-denial. In this system, strength became sin, pride turned into guilt, and desire was chained beneath layers of shame. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was evolution. As civilization grew more complex, raw power lost its edge. Force gave way to subtlety, and influence took root where brute strength once ruled. Nietzsche saw morality, especially slave morality, as a tool of the weak to control the strong. And at its center stood the feminine ideal: meekness as virtue, humility as holiness, surrender as nobility. He found this not only repressive, but deeply unnatural. Life, to Nietzsche, was about expansion, force, creation, not repression. But here's the twist. Nietzsche didn't blame women. He blamed the spiritualization of womanhood. He blamed the world for dressing up fragility and dependency as the ultimate good, for rewarding submission over assertion. He saw it as a trap, one that caught both sexes. Men were taught to soften themselves, to kneel before false virtues, and women were taught to weaponize their weakness, to trade power for pity. In this framework, morality became a masquerade, a theater of guilt where instincts were suffocated and the will to power was demonized. Nietzsche wasn't condemning women. He was exposing the moral framework that used their image to tame the wildness in man. The result? A society built on restraint, not growth, on obedience, not becoming, and beneath it all, the quiet domination of the moral woman. Nietzsche viewed power as more than brute force. It was also the art of influence, of bending wills without ever raising a weapon. And in this domain, he believed women had mastered something men rarely understood: seduction as strategy. Not simply in a sexual sense, but as a psychological dance. The power to allure, to mystify, to suggest rather than demand. It was a power that did not conquer by force, but by fascination. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche writes that when a woman has scholarly inclinations, there's usually something wrong with her sexual nature. To many, that sounds offensive, but dig deeper and something more revealing emerges. Nietzsche wasn't merely dismissing intellectual women. He was hinting at a deeper truth: that feminine power is instinctive, not academic. It doesn't argue, it doesn't reason, it enchants. For Nietzsche, the feminine did not seek truth through logic. It shaped truth through desire. This, in his eyes, was both dangerous and brilliant. Seduction, after all, is the art of turning someone's own will against them, of guiding them where you want them to go while letting them believe it was their idea. In a world obsessed with dominance, Nietzsche saw women wielding a subtler, more insidious form of power, and that terrified men. But he also respected it, because in seduction, Nietzsche found something aligned with the will to power, the ability to shape, to influence, to control, without ever appearing to do so. The tragedy, as he saw it, was that this power was often denied or misunderstood. Women were praised for their beauty, pitied for their weakness, but rarely acknowledged as tacticians in the battle for dominance. To Nietzsche, the feminine did not lack strength. It simply wore a different mask, and those who failed to see it were already under its spell. In Nietzsche's universe, woman was more than flesh. She was symbol, a force not just in life, but in art, myth, and metaphysics. He once wrote, "Everything about woman is a riddle, and everything about woman has one solution: pregnancy." But this wasn't just about biology. It was about creation. Woman as the vessel through which man sought transcendence, immortality, and meaning. Not as an equal participant in greatness, but as its mirror, its backdrop, its necessary illusion. To Nietzsche, the feminine became a kind of spiritual mirage, something idealized, worshipped, feared. Artists painted her, poets wept for her, prophets warned against her. But in all these versions, woman was not a subject. She was an object, refracted through the lens of male longing and male limitation. The eternal feminine was not real. It was a projection, a dream, a shadow cast on the wall of man's own cave. And yet, it endured, because it served a purpose. Woman, in this mythic form, represented the unknown, the chaotic, the Dionysian, a wild counterbalance to the order of logos and reason. She was both temptation and transcendence. The thing that pulled man downward, and the thing that made his climb upward meaningful. Nietzsche saw this contradiction and didn't flinch from it. He embraced it. To him, the feminine was not meant to be solved. It was meant to be experienced, fought against, surrendered to, and above all, understood as necessary. This idea haunted him, because while he distrusted women, he also saw them as essential to man's becoming, not as partners on the path to greatness, but as the storms that test him along the way. The myth of women, then, was not a lie. It was a lens, a tool through which Nietzsche examined the eternal struggle between chaos and control. For Nietzsche, love was never innocent. It was not romance, nor tenderness, nor the promise of mutual completion. It was a battlefield, raw, strategic, and almost always asymmetrical. When he wrote of love between men and women, he stripped it of its poetic dressing and exposed something primal underneath, the will to power. Not just in politics or war, but in the bedroom, in relationships, in the subtle wars of everyday life. To Nietzsche, love was less about union and more about domination. One seeks to possess, the other to surrender or resist. Beneath every affection lies a hidden contest, a desire to shape, to influence, to command. He believed men often confuse this act of domination for devotion, and women learn to master its forms through appearance, seduction, and silence. Neither side is innocent. Each is playing a game, some knowingly, others not. He saw courtship as warfare by other means. Compliments are tactics, promises are masks. Even sacrifice can be a tool of control. Nietzsche was not trying to destroy love, but to unmask it, to strip it of sentiment and see what was really happening beneath the surface. And what he saw disturbed him. A constant cycle of power traded for affection, freedom exchanged for security, identity surrendered in the name of intimacy. This vision of love as possession is brutal, even cynical. But Nietzsche didn't paint it that way to mock it. He did it to free us from illusion. If love is about power, then we must love with our eyes open, with awareness. Not to dominate or submit blindly, but to recognize the game and choose our role consciously. For only when we stop pretending that love is pure can we begin to understand its true weight and the responsibility that comes with it. Beneath Nietzsche's provocative language about women lies a deeper symbolic current, one often missed by those who take his words at face value. He wasn't just describing women as individuals. He was using the feminine as a metaphor. To Nietzsche, woman wasn't only a biological reality. She was an archetype, a force of nature, of seduction, of chaos, of mystery. She represented everything irrational, instinctive, and untamed within the human soul, and that terrified him. In a world obsessed with order, logic, and control, Nietzsche saw the feminine as the eternal reminder that not everything can be reasoned with. Woman, in this sense, was not the enemy, but the mirror. She revealed the parts of man he wished to deny: emotion, vulnerability, instinct, the yearning for surrender. And yet, this very chaos was also life-giving. Creation itself is chaotic. So is passion. So is transformation. Nietzsche feared the feminine not because he believed it weak, but because he knew it was powerful. Powerful in ways the masculine couldn't always comprehend. He saw how men tried to cage women, define them, suppress their force, not out of superiority, but out of fear. Fear of being undone, of being consumed, of losing control. But he also understood that this fear came at a cost. To reject the feminine, both in women and within oneself, was to reject life's fullness. Reason without instinct becomes sterile. Order without chaos becomes tyranny. Nietzsche's unease around women wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. He was confronting a truth most people run from: that real transformation requires chaos. And if woman represents that chaos, then maybe she is not meant to be conquered. Maybe she is meant to be danced with, respected, feared, and embraced, not as a threat, but as a necessary force in the evolution of the soul. What if Nietzsche's radical thoughts on women weren't a condemnation, but a call to transcendence? The Übermensch, the overman, is the figure who rises above conventional morality, breaking free from societal constraints to define his own path. But here's the paradox. To truly embody the Übermensch, you can't just transcend external morality. You must also transcend your inner conflicts, your contradictions, your fears. And that includes the way we view femininity. Nietzsche's philosophy isn't about rejecting the feminine, it's about integrating it. The Übermensch doesn't repress the feminine force within him or in others, he embraces it. He understands that the feminine is not weakness. It's a source of power that, when untamed, can either create or destroy. The overman knows that mastering this force within oneself means mastering life itself. The problem lies in how society has defined femininity: weak, passive, submissive. But the true Übermensch doesn't accept these artificial limitations. He refuses to live in the shadow of the traditional roles imposed by the world. In this sense, the woman who embraces her true nature becomes a figure of incredible strength. She does not need to mimic man to prove her worth. Like the Übermensch, she must define herself on her own terms, not based on societal standards. In the world of the Übermensch, women aren't defined by submission or compliance, but by their capacity for self-overcoming. She is not a muse to be worshipped from afar, but a force to be reckoned with, wild, creative, and sovereign. Nietzsche's vision for women wasn't a mere challenge to the status quo. It was an invitation for women to rise beyond their own limitations, to shape the world with their own will, and to live as equal creators in the dance of existence.